Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Matt,
And I'm Steve.
and this is Marvel Reread Club.
So, hello everybody. We have a special guest today. Rachel Gluckstern is an editor that I know from my days working at DC. Rachel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you, Steve. Hi, everybody. I'm Rachel Gluckstern. I am a longtime comics editor, and I'm still alive to tell the tale. I spent over 10 years at DC Comics, working on all sorts of things, including the birth of Jaime Reyes, the Blue Beetle, Manhunter, Kate Spencer, and several years in the Batman group, including Batman and Robin, and one of the first, if not the first, female editor of Detective Comics.
Wow. That's very impressive.
Yeah, I like to brag. Since then, I have moved into traditional publishing with some graphic novel programs and consultations, and also digital publishing when I was the executive editor at Interpop, a digital media entertainment company. And nowadays, I am full-time freelance and consultation services with my own business, Superstar Editor. And I have known Steve a very long time. It's true.
Yes, I've worked on some of the Jaime Reyes Blue Beetle issues you've talked about, as well as Robin and a number of other things.
I'm reading through your bio here, Rachel, and I see she edited the book, The Gross Science of Sneezing, Coughing, and Vomiting. I'm surprised you didn't lead with that.
Even better, I wrote that book.
Oh, I'm
So-
sorry. I'm misreading here. You wrote that book. Congratulations.
Yes, so I can class up any dinner party.
So, and actually, yeah, it did occur to me that there's a chance that you and Matt's wife might have run across each other with your publishing stuff.
Oh,
Matt, would you want to explain who?
Have you ever heard the name Betsy Bird?
yes, she's a very big in the children's lit world. Wow.
Yes. That is my wife. I have not given her much, God knows, but I gave her the name Bird. She had a crush on me from afar in college, and we never met. And then years later, someone said, "Hey, you should move to Minneapolis where a lot of Earlham people are hanging out. Here's the list of people from my college, Earlham, that are hanging out in Minneapolis." And she said, "Oh, that guy Matt Bird, I always had a crush on from afar. He's living in Minneapolis. I could move to Minneapolis and get him to marry me, and then my name would be Betsy Bird." And then,
Wow.
sure enough, she then enacted her plan and she moved to Minneapolis. And the first night she was in town, her new roommate said, "What do you want to do?" And she said, "Call up that bird." And she invited me over, and we were going out within a week, and we were engaged within 9 months. And then she
Wow.
became Betsy Bird, and she became a big deal in children's literature. And I'm glad that you guys have encountered each other.
And I thought I was a goal achiever, but I think that just put me to shame.
Yes.
All right. So, well, fantastic. Thank you for coming on, and we should go ahead and talk about some comics. So, Matt, why don't you take it away with Spider-Man?
We're starting with Amazing Spider-Man number 42, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
That's what I'm starting with.
All right.
Which I will say that when I looked at the cover, I thought it was Sandman, and it is not Sandman.
Yes. Because he's not named. It's so strange. All right. So let's go ahead and jump in with Amazing Spider-Man number 42, The Birth of a Superhero. I feel like this is a guy named Joe all over again, and that they've got a perfectly good hero or villain/hero here, but he's got an entirely generic costume and he's got no name. So we were introduced to John Jameson, the son of J. Jonah Jameson, in Amazing Spider-Man number 1, where he was an astronaut saved by Spider-Man. We were then reintroduced to him last issue, where he was being chased by the Rhino because he was exposed to space spores, and nobody knew what effect that would have on him, but the Soviets wanted to get their hands on him and had seemingly hired the Rhino to grab him, or some bad foreign power. We never found out who the Rhino was working for. Well, in this issue, we find out what those space spores did, and they give John Jameson superpowers. Now, this sort of doesn't take. This could have been John Jameson's thing from this point on, but they don't give him a name, which is bizarre. They don't give him a memorable costume. And they cure his powers by the end of the issue. And then he comes back as Man-Wolf. He later gets an entirely different set of powers with an entirely different origin. This time he goes to the moon and finds a stone. And then they decide what to do with Man-Wolf. Let's make him an intergalactic adventurer. And then he goes on a whole series of intergalactic adventures drawn by George Paris. But this is the road that could have been. This is the other version of John Jameson they considered doing. It says the birth of a superhero. Spider-Man is for some reason stealing a bank bag. They have to insist that this is not, says, no, you're not looking at someone disguised as Spidey or imitating Spidey, nor are you witnessing an imaginary or a dream sequence. Since this is an authentic, honest to Mary Marty Goodman Marvel mag, this scene is really happening. And then they're sort of setting up this mystery of why this is going on. Produced by the Batty Bullpen Swingin'est Spido Files, Smile and Stan Lee, writer, Jazzy Johnny Romita, artist. So this is the first issue of Spider-Man that John Romita has both penciled and inked. And I love Romita's inking. I think his inking on this issue is fantastic. Slammin' Sammy Rosen, letterer.
I would like to register my objection to the term swingin'est Spido Files. That just no. I object.
It does sound a little salacious.
Yes.
Yes. So then Spider-Man dumps the bank bag in the river. Meanwhile, Betty Brant is back working for J. Jonah Jameson, hanging out with Ned Leeds, both looking more attractive than they ever looked under Ditko's pen. And Frederick Boswell, who, to Romita's credit, is not a dreamboat now, runs in the office and says that Spider-Man has finally gone bad. Meanwhile, J. Jonah Jameson is meeting with his son, who suddenly becomes huge and strong and is smashing everything in his general vicinity. They put a very generic yellow and green suit on him and do not give him a superhero name and tell him that he is a hero now. Meanwhile, the Rhino. So last issue, I asked the number one question that must be asked in terms of the Rhino: how does he go to the bathroom? And that is only confirmed in this issue because they have not taken his suit off, and they confirm in this issue for the first time that his suit is melded to him and cannot be taken off, which is good in terms of from now on, they're never going to be able to confiscate it from him when he gets arrested in various times. But it is bad when you think about potential bathroom complications. Foggy Nelson is hired, I guess, to represent. Is he representing the Rhino here?
That's what it looked like.
Appointed to defend the Rhino in court. The Rhino escapes. Meanwhile, we get a big change. So we're going to have two big Peter Parker lady friend changes in this issue. The big one is going to come at the end of the issue, but then we get a minor one, but not so minor earlier on. We get Gwen Stacy with her headband for the first time. She is no longer going to have her little devil horn barrettes. She is going to have a headband, which makes her look much more normal and pretty. Sort of Romita taking charge of the book. Peter Parker still has his motorcycle, but it is not necessarily helping him very much. Gwen invites him over for a party, but then he remembers he's got to go meet Mary Jane, who he's still assuming will be a dumpy plain Jane. Tries to apologize and no one wants to hear it. Spider-Man then ends up confronting John Jameson. Of course, Spider-Man is now perceived as a villain, and John Jameson is attacking him, trying to be a hero. That's why the book is called The Birth of a Superhero. They are fighting. Spider-Man finally establishes in flashback why he stole the bag. It turned out that that bag had a bomb in it and that he had to steal it and dump it in the river to keep it from blowing anybody up. Spider-Man is telling John Jameson, just ask the bank if they're missing any money. He stops in on J. Jonah Jameson and says, call the bank. They're not missing any money. Come on, got to stop this. He eventually figures out a scientific way to depower John Jameson and says, boy, my spider powers are great, but it was my science savvy that really liked this one. And then J. Jonah Jameson finally admits that Spider-Man didn't steal the money and should be glad that Spider-Man cured his son. Then we get one of the most legendary moments in all of Marvel Comics. Peter can't go to Gwen's party. He has to go meet this dumpy plain Jane, Mary Jane Watson, who he has been avoiding for, I don't know, 30 issues at this point, maybe more. And at first, Ditko had implied that she was unattractive, and then he had her appear, but with her face always covered by giant sunflowers or various things like that, as Liz Allen and Betty Brant had interacted with Mary Jane, but Peter had not, and they had both commented that she was very attractive. So then Ditko chose, for Ditko's reasons, to never show her face, just like he never revealed who Green Goblin was, and just like he never revealed various other things. And then as soon as Ditko is gone, then immediately Stan and Johnny revealed Green Goblin's face. And now a couple of issues later, they are finally revealing to Peter Mary Jane. And he says, you mean that's Mary Jane? And she says, "Face it, Tiger, you just hit the jackpot." Not the best way to introduce yourself to somebody, not going like, "What, you?" But so then a legendary panel, she looks very pretty. She looks very pretty in a way that is entirely different from Gwen, which is a lot of comic book artists can't do. A lot of comic book artists can't draw more than one type of pretty girl face. I'm sure you encountered this as an editor yourself, Rachel. Encountered some, I'm sure, otherwise excellent comic artists who you ask them to draw different looking faces and they just can't do it. And this is a legendary ending of an issue and the beginning of many great stories to come. I think it is way overdue to finally meet Mary Jane, finally see her face, finally get these two together, have our new love triangle set up that will drive this book for the next 80 issues and precisely 80 issues. And I think this is an excellent story. It's great to see Romita inking himself. John Jameson is sort of a missed opportunity. I wish they'd given him a name. I wish they'd given him a better costume. He could have stuck this way instead of having to end up in other dimensions fighting as a man-wolf. But I thought it was a good story. Rachel, what did you think of this story?
Well, it was pretty exciting to realize that where this issue was going to end, as they were setting that up. And actually, what's one of the most interesting parts of this issue for me is the fact that the grand reveal, there are 6 panels on this page.
Mm-hmm.
It's a small panel, but it's like one of the most iconic introduction panels. We think of it as a splash page even.
Yeah.
It's that iconic, but it's actually very small.
It's funny, when we read Hulk #1, we found the same thing with the shot of Bruce Banner getting hit with the gamma bomb. That's just one panel of a 9-panel page. But it has so much power that later you usually think of it as, whenever anyone reproduces that moment, they always do it as a half page or a full page.
Yep.
Yeah.
I love that you're giving me this context about Mary Jane being introduced slowly via Ditko, because I had actually forgotten that. And it cracks me up that it's like this Maris on Frasier type of deal where you never see her. And honestly, it'd be hilarious if there's someday a comic that has a Maris type character out there.
And they could have totally done that. They could have had her be like Maris on Frasier. And the whole joke is that we never, ever, ever see her. And to this day, they could be publishing Spider-Man comics in 2024 and have Peter constantly almost running into Mary Jane. But I think it's to Lee and Romita's credit. They're like, no, let's go ahead and unpack this and let's go ahead and pay off some of it. We've been pushing the rock uphill and now let's release it.
Yeah, I was actually thinking more of Norm's wife on
also classic Vera. The issue itself, it's like there are several different storylines happening all at once, and I know that Marvel is very good at rising and falling action and E stories becoming A stories later on, but this one is a little complicated, keeping track of all the different strands going on, because you have your A story with John Jameson going through his moon spores. And then you've got the Rhino and Foggy Nelson wandering in. And then you have Mary Jane and you have Gwen Stacy. Like, there's a lot going on.
So if Stan Lee brought you this script, you'd say, hey, let's go ahead and untangle this stuff a little bit.
I don't know, because once you're in it, with the day-to-day and the month-to-month grind, like, you can keep track of it. And sometimes you forget that not every reader is immersed in the script level as you are. I would say that's the number one thing I would forget as an editor. Absolutely.
Right.
What I did find interesting when I was reading through all the issues is that for the most part, readers were able to jump in and figure out what was going on. Because there were summaries via the exposition or via big editor's box at the beginning or whatever, because everybody has to comment on what's happening at all times to make it clear what's happening. You understand what's happening.
No, there were no comic book stores. There were no pack issues. There was no way if you were jumping in to go back and find out what had happened before this. There was no guarantee if you bought this issue that you would be able to find the next issue on whatever New York City newsstand that you got your comic books from, or what, heaven forbid, any sort of Peoria, Illinois comic stand that you're getting your comics from. And so you just had to be able to, even though there's lots of multiple issue storylines, and this is in the middle of 2 multiple issue storylines or multiple issue storylines, you just had to be able to catch up.
Yep.
Yeah, Matt is still traumatized by the first issue of Avengers that we ever got off a newsstand when we were 5 and 8, and he couldn't find the second half of that story anywhere.
For years later.
What issue was that?
It's Avengers number 207, where they were fighting the Berserker, who they never fought again. And it was part one of a two-part storyline. And, it's funny, it was right around that time that Jim Shooter had decreed that no more two-part storylines, because kids were still getting most of their comics from newsstands, and it was too hard to find second part of the issue. Well, he could not have been more wrong, because this made me the comic book fan I was. Because when we returned from vacation, I said, we must find a comic book store. I must start buying every issue of Avengers to try to find the second part of this storyline. And that's how I became a comic book addict, is because I had started with part one of a two-part storyline, and I was desperate to find part two, which I didn't find for years later. But by that point, I'd bought thousands of comics. So
All right, so just a few things. One thing is that John Romita seems to still be aping Ditko's style a little bit. The bank manager on page 2 has a real Ditko look to him. On page 19, we get some real Ditko fingers on Peter Parker, and he's using some texturing that is very, very Ditko. It's like these little dots almost that are along something to show a little bit of shading. So like on page 20, the panel that's right in the middle of the page, you can see it on the curtains there. Although we have curtains, whereas Ditko never had curtains. He only had horizontal blinds. John Jameson, at one point, when he's starting to get angry about some of this stuff, he says to his dad, "I don't give a rap about who robbed the blasted bank." So RAP, which is, once again, I like to point out these various little things where I'm like, was that a saying? And finally, one thing that I often notice about Stan Lee is he's often like, exactly 30 seconds later, or precisely this amount of time, and it always strikes me as silly. He's starting to lampoon himself about that lately. When they find John Jameson unconscious, it says 10 minutes and 26 seconds later, parentheses, because we know you're a stickler for accuracy. So I just find it nice that he is now acknowledging that odd storytelling tick that he has.
Yes.
But yeah, overall a fantastic issue and a historic issue. And yes, it is very interesting to see that Gwen got her headband in the same issue that we first saw, in the same issue that Mary Jane first got a face.
I think that Romita knows this is going to be the new love triangle, and it's very important to have them be distinct characters. And Gwen's headband is going to be one of her defining characteristics. It was very important to him that they both look very pretty, but in very different ways, and both different from Betty Brant. I think Romita knew this was Marvel's best-selling book, and that he had to keep it going and keep it fresh and revivify it to a certain extent, because Peter is no longer in love with Betty Brant, and Liz Allen is going to disappear for about 100 issues, and he's got to refresh the book. And he is refreshing the book here, and he is doing a wonderful job. Let me just ask, since we do have a comic book editor here, as I was saying, there's so many artists that can't draw different types of pretty girl faces. As an editor,
or attractive guy faces, for that matter.
Or someone was sharing on the internet recently, like, here is John Byrne drawing 6 different blonde guys, and you can't tell them apart. And it's like, oh, is that Hank Pym or is that Captain America? You can't tell. And I love John Byrne. He's one of my favorite artists, but it was pretty damning to put these 6 faces next to each other. As an editor, how important was it to you to go like, no, you know, these women don't have different faces? And how would you deal with that with artists who maybe weren't the greatest at that?
I mean, you have to know their limitations. Am I? No, and I don't even mean that in a snarky way.
Right.
Are we going to get quality work if we push for something that they just can't quite manage? You know, do you want different faces if one of the faces looks really terrible? I think, and drawing different faces is a really hard skill. There's the point of, is this the artist's style, or are there differences? With John Byrne, he has a very distinctive face style. That is absolutely true. But can you still tell the characters apart? When he's drawing X-Men, it's helpful because not all of them, look remotely the same. So that helps. But
yeah, and Byrne did a much better job on X-Men, because Byrne, famously picked a bizarre character actor from the movie Slapshot to be his model for Wolverine's face, and he always gave Wolverine a distinct face. Wolverine's face looked nothing like Colossus's face, and But yeah, I think this was art from a little bit later in his career. This is when he was doing West Coast Adventures, and I think he wasn't putting in the effort he had been putting in earlier.
I mean, even Perez had his issues from time to time, although I think he's one of the best ones when it comes to distinct characters. But yeah, I love John Romita. He has his stock cast, we shall say. Everybody's got their stock cast. So at some point, you have to let other details do the lifting, which is hairstyles and whatnot.
Yeah.
And the headband.
Okay, cool.
I think the headband's doing a lot of heavy lifting here. I think it's like, the headband is better than the Brett's, and I'm going to give her a distinctive thing when maybe I can't put in as much work on her face to distinguish her from Mary Jane as I'd like to. She's got that big honking headband there to make it very clear this is Gwen Stacy.
I mean, when that reporter ran in, I thought it was J. Jonah Jameson at first. And I was like, why are they calling him Foswell? And then I looked at him like, oh, he is different. But it took me a minute.
Yes.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to an issue that is just as legendary as that issue of Amazing Spider-Man. Daredevil number 22, The Tri-Man Lives. I mean, this is all of us know this issue. This is so famous.
Face it, Tiger. You just met Tri-Man, and you hit the jackpot.
Yes, and in this case, we have the love triangle of Daredevil, the Masked Marauder, and the Gladiator. Even
in the issue, they can't decide whether or not to call him the Tri-Man. They're like, yes, we have created the Tri-Man. And then they go, or maybe we should call him the Tri-Android. Then they're like, no, let's call him Tri-Man. Or Tri-Android, maybe Tri-Man. It's like, Stan, have these debates within the Marvel office, but settle it before you start writing the comic book. You don't want this to spill over into the comic book itself.
The Tri-Man Lives, written with rapture by Stan Lee, drawn with drama by Gene Colan, delineated with delight by Jacoya and Ayers. So I'm guessing that this was running a little bit late, so they had to split the pages up between two inkers. Lettered with the ball game on by Sam Rosen. So let me see if I can get through this thing as quickly as possible, since it is, not the best issue ever. So where we left off, Daredevil had been on this island where he had been taken by the owl. He has now escaped on the owl's mechanical owl, together with the judge that he was rescuing. Daredevil is actually steering the thing just by shifting his weight on top of this mechanical owl. I had assumed that where they were was in the Caribbean somewhere, just because, it's got some volcanic activity. It's got like a, Age of Exploration sort of fort castle sort of thing on it. But here they just flew back to the New York area because, of course, that's all that exists in the Marvel Universe.
We've established in the past that there are abandoned castles within range of New York. There's quite a few of them. One of them turns out to be on a volcanic island, but, it's just another abandoned castle within flying range, within gliding range of New York that happens to be on a volcanic island, let's say just off of Montauk.
Sure.
You can't trust Montauk.
So Matt, you've talked sometimes about how you've read all 8 or 9 of these issues, and then we go to talk about them, and there's at least one issue where you're like, wait, did I even read this? Like, this is so forgettable that I don't really remember any of this. That's this issue for me, so I'm going to do my best here. So the owl blows up the mechanical owl, but Daredevil and the judge are safe. We've still got the Masked Marauder and Gladiator. Gladiator is a much cooler villain than Masked Marauder. Masked Marauder is just utterly ridiculous. His look reminds me of Zoidberg from Futurama.
I was thinking Party City Magneto costume.
Yes. What would the name for that be?
Mr. Magnets.
Yes, yes, exactly. Anyway, apparently Masked Marauder is building this android, which he's then going to put in the skills and abilities of 3 different people. What is it? A dancer and a boxer and strategist of some sort. I forget. Anyway, that's the excuse for calling him the Tri-Man.
He's a bank robber.
He's not a real dancer. A wrestler named the Mangler, a safecracker named Dancer, and a criminal genius called the Brain. Now, this whole thing just makes no sense because he's like, oh, we're going to create the ultimate villain because he's going to be a genius and he's going to be a great safecracker and he's going to be a great wrestler. And it's like, and then they put them together and they're like, okay, let's have him take over a boxing match. and just be like a big dumb bruiser. He is in no way someone who has got the brain in him. He is no way using his brain power to take over this boxing match. Why, if they were going to have him take over a boxing match, did they choose to have specifically a wrestler instead of a boxer? And the whole thing just makes no sense.
Also, Mass Marauder and the Gladiator have been literally fighting each other. They are not a good combo. And so adding a third supervillain in here that is supposed to be like super smart and super tough, isn't he just going to beat both of you up? Yeah. So then there's a big fight, a big boxing match that's happening, and Foggy and Karen are going to go, but then Karen ends up giving a ticket to Matt, and it's like, why would the blind guy want to go to see a boxing match? It doesn't really seem to make much sense, but they're trying to get him there for reasons, and part of the reasons are, secret identities are really just kind of not taken seriously in the Marvel Universe, so, we need Daredevil there, so let's get Matt Murdock there, and yada, yada, yada.
I have to, actually, one thing. She doesn't offer him a ticket. He makes her take him there in a Daredevil costume that Foggy once wore, saying he'll be a decoy.
Yes. Okay.
He's like, I need to get there. We've always established that Daredevil has a hard time getting around town. He's like, the only way I can get there is to have Karen drive me there. Okay, well, that's not so weird. But it's like, I'm going to convince Karen that I should dress up as Daredevil, even though I am not Daredevil, in order to distract from the actual Daredevil, who is sure to show up and fight the Tri-Man. And I'm going to do what I can to distract away, to help Daredevil do that somehow by also being in the crowd wearing a Daredevil costume, which, by the way, fits me to a T. Really, I look shockingly like Daredevil when I put it on.
Right.
Yeah.
So I can understand why you glossed over it, because it is a lot.
Yes. It's a lot, and it's not great. We've talked before about how Gene Colan seems to make some odd choices in terms of his splash pages, and we got one on page 17 that, okay, it's a big action shot of Daredevil, knocking down the Tri-Man, but again, it's like, I don't know if I necessarily would have gone for a full page splash with that. In the end, Daredevil nearly defeats the Tri-Man, but then the Gladiator and the Masked Marauder call out, and they say, hey, actually, we're here, and Franklin Nelson and his secretary Karen are in the arena. Surrender immediately or they die. And of course, everybody knows that Daredevil has something to do with Foggy and Karen, but, nobody can figure out that he's Matt. All that sort of stuff. So, this is a pretty forgettable issue. As I said, I actually kind of forgot it after reading it myself. Just a couple of things that I had extra notes on here. At one point near the beginning of the issue, Daredevil is thinking about the owl. He says, he's nowhere in the vicinity of New York. My radar sense could hardly miss his powerful bird-like emanations. Okay, sure. Bird-like emanations.
That he can detect in a city of 8 million people, that he can single them out.
Oh, well, of course he can. Yeah, so another one of the odd splash pages that I guess I didn't mention at the time is page 6. That's the one where he's climbing into his office, which just, there's no real reason for that to be a splash page at all. And also, I noticed that, and once again, it seems, I'm assuming that Jacoya and Ayers had to split up pages because this was in a hurry, but I really don't like some of the feathering choices that were made on the blowing drapes in that panel, because they're like going horizontal to the ground on one fold and vertical to the ground on the other fold. And it just really looked, let me put it this way. If someone showed up at a comics convention and showed me this in their portfolio, this is one thing I would say, hey, buddy, you need to be more careful about this.
I'm picturing Frank Giacoya getting, if you were the editor, Steve, and you were calling up Frank Giacoya to ream him out, and he's like, you are giving me a call about the drape feathering. And this is how I imagine Frank Giacoya speaking. But I can imagine him being like, look, buddy, if they're noticing the drape feathering, we're not doing our job.
Well, then you shouldn't have done this as a splash page. So, or Gene shouldn't have. And Rachel, sometimes we have some criticisms of Gene Colan here sometimes, but he drew that first issue of Avengers that we ever read. So we have been Gene Colan fans since the moment we were comics fans. So that's a caveat. Last thing, one other plot point that I glossed over is the whole point of this thing with the Tri-Man and all this sort of stuff is the Mass Marauder and Gladiator are basically applying to be the new leaders of the Maggia since Count Nefaria is now in custody. And, you would think that would just set loose a power vacuum that would be filled by all of these ambitious lieutenants who would be killing each other and trying to consolidate power. But no, they're apparently just doing job applications. And apparently beating Daredevil will prove that you're the greatest evil genius of all time and should lead the Maggia, which completely tracks.
They're doing job applications over Zoom, which is quite impressive for 1966. Like they are ready for COVID.
It's a global search. They're not being, limited by local talent.
Yes, we are receiving a televised message from America on our special closed circuit frequency.
If there's one thing we know about the Mafia, it's that they're not prejudiced. They don't believe in regionalism in any way.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, that's more than enough from me about this issue. Do either of you have comments?
I'm glad you pointed out the splash page of him entering the office, because I was going to say, if you want to talk weird splash pages, that one just has no purpose. What I will say about Tri-Man's design, he's an all-white body with green trunks and this weird green diamond kind of in the center. It actually kind of reminds me of the Vision, and the Vision has not been introduced yet. So if this set us on the path toward the Vision, it's worth it. I also like the fact that, they have boxing going on, because boxing happened at Madison Square, of course. And boxing is obviously huge to Daredevil's history. But I like that Tri-Man has a wrestler, because wrestling would have really been coming up at that time.
Well, it should have just been a wrestling match. He should have, he's part wrestler. Why is he interrupting a boxing match? He should have, I don't know if they were doing wrestling at Madison Square Garden at this time, but, and Daredevil ends up sort of wrestling with him. Like the big splash page on page 17 is more like wrestling than boxing. So anyway, just bizarre. Okay.
So is that it for this issue of Daredevil?
I think really all that can be said.
Oh, thank God. Okay, so let's move on. Matt, you take the next one.
All right, let's go into the Mighty Thor 134, The People Breeders. We've got, on the cover, we are being introduced to the High Evolutionary, and they're making a different man-wolf in the background, and then Thor is bursting in. And as always with the Coletta cover, Coletta is, Rachel, we've been talking a lot about Coletta getting better, and he's been getting better at everything but elbows. And indeed, on this cover, Coletta is just obsessed with doing a million little lines on the elbows, and everything else is okay.
No, you're right. That's quite the elbow bulge.
Okay, so then we have pretty good Coletta inked cover, except for Thor's elbows. Then we go ahead and jump in to the issue, The Mighty Thor, The People Breeders, and Thor is returning from the Black Galaxy with the recorder and meets back up with the Rachelians, and suddenly on page 3, Galactus, huge splash page of Galactus, who just shows up seemingly on his way to the Black Galaxy, maybe to eat Ego, it is sort of implied, and he just shows up on one page and then disappears. This is the only time he is seen in Thor for a long time. And it's great to see him again. And Kirby draws the hell out of him, and Coletta does a shockingly good job inking him. But it's just a bizarre cameo. Thor makes it back to Earth, where Tandaniel is still at the police station trying to explain that she is now Empress of Earth. Thor brings some other Rachelians who quickly arrest her, and she's like, oh no, I'm being arrested. My colonization is being canceled. But then is told, actually, now the High Commissioner has fallen in love with you and has chosen you for his wife. And she thinks the High Commissioner, whom I have loved from afar for years, then on to Rigel, where waits my heart's desire. So I think that Stanley has fallen in love with Tandaniel just as much as I have and wanted to give her a happy ending, which I think is great. This is not the last we will see of Tandaniel. She will show up again in other comics. She will have more Thor storylines in the future, but I love that she gets a little happy ending here. This is sort of like her saying, my name would be Betsy Bird, and then going off. And
So meanwhile, I will say that the drawing of Thor on the top of page 5 there, that is some of the Coletta that we do not like to see on Thor's right arm there.
Yes.
It's just very scribbly and scratchy looking.
Coda is control himself just remarkably well in these comics, except for arms. And if that's the one thing we have to give him to get better inking on everything else, I'm okay with it. So then we cut to a small European principality, which is not named. I would think it would just be named Wundagore. Everyone keeps talking about Wundagore, but I guess that's the name of the High Evolutionary's palace, sort of atop the unnamed principality. We have Jane still working for the two bizarre people who she started working for that want to hire her to teach at Wundagore. So Thor at this point has realized that Jane has disappeared, and then the Rigelians, as sort of a parting gift, give him a little tracker to track down Jane, which is good because she is way on the other side of the world in some European principality. And so then he goes there and finds her, and then we meet the High Evolutionary's knights on their atomic steeds. These atomic steeds will have a long Marvel history. Eventually, the Black Knight will end up flying around on one of them in later Roger Stern Avengers comics. But at first, are they called Atomic Knights? No, that's a DC thing. They're called Atomic.
I think
knights.
they're called
on Atomic Steeds.
Right, but aren't they called the New Men? Isn't that the name of the race the High Evolutionary has created?
I think they will eventually be called the New Men. So then they all have helmets on at first. So they're like, oh, we just assume they're human. But then they kidnap Thor, sort of, bring him back to their place, and they take off their helmets. But wait, first let's go meet, of all people, Wanda and Pietro, who will much later be turned out to have an origin. They will be mutants and then not mutants and then mutants and then not mutants. And their origin will have to do with Wundagore. Well, it turns out that is set up right away. The fact that they may have an alternate non-mutant origin that has to do with Wundagore, that is introduced mere pages after Wundagore here, because of all things, Pietro, aka Quicksilver, is running around and Wanda is chasing right after him in her Lamborghini. Her Lamborghini 330 GT, which is not an actual Lamborghini, but it is similar to the name of an actual Lamborghini. And
similar to the name of an actual Ferrari. We are not car guys, but I will go ahead and credit some people on the Marvel Comics 1961 to 1986 group for doing that research for me and telling me.
Is this the last time we will ever see the Scarlet Witch's Lamborghini? Does this ever come back?
I don't think so.
I haven't seen a lot of it. Must pay to be in the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. That's all I'm going to say.
Did she buy this when she got back there? Did she have it previously and it was just garaged this whole time? Also, it does not look like a very well-paved road she is driving this thing on. Just so many questions.
Yeah, whole thing. She's going to be the James Dean of the Avengers here. She's going to wipe out and have a Lamborghini accident. So then, but that's all we see of them. That's just a brief glimpse of them. We then cut to the High Evolutionary, who we meet for the first time. He is turning a wolf into a human being. And it turns out what Thor saw when they all took off their helmets is that they all have animal heads. And these are the new men. And he's like, oh, clearly these are bad guys. I got to kick some ass. And then he finds, wait, Jane is teaching them in a schoolhouse. Although the way Kirby draws it, it looks like one of the new men is teaching and she's a student. Then you realize from the dialogue that no, she is one of the teachers and she has just gone into the stands to help someone with their reading, seemingly. So then Thor at this point is entirely confused. And then suddenly, because the High Evolutionary is distracted, he is not managing his transformation of this wolf into a man beast very well. And the man beast comes alive and says, I live, I feel, and more, I hate. And so then he is going to be a bad guy. That is it for part one of this issue. What a crazy story. What a crazy story. How bizarre. The High Evolutionary will go on to be a great character. So much good use out of High Evolutionary. He will be the villain in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. The art in this issue, fantastic art by Kirby. Excellent. I won't say excellent. Shockingly good inking by Coletta, except for the elbows. And excellent scripting by Lee. I say scripting, but wait, we have a huge change in Marvel Comics that begins with this issue that I failed to note before. The credits say a Stan Lee Jack Kirby Fantastic Classic, inked by Vince Coletta, lettered by Sammy Rosen. So this is the first Marvel comic, and it will be from this point on where Stan Lee is no longer credited as writer on the Jack Kirby books. from this point on, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby will get co-equal credit on the same line, and they will be credited as co-creators. And this is obviously Stan Lee had lost Steve Ditko, who had gotten fed up with the amount of credit he was getting. Wally Wood seemingly had been equally fed up, and he has also lost Wally Wood. And he has decided to hang on to Jack by no longer announcing, I wrote this comic and Jack drew it, which, of course, we know isn't really true. We know that the artists were doing a tremendous amount of the writing. And at first, he just does this with Jack. And then starting in a couple months, he's going to do it with everybody. So even Spider-Man is going to have co-credited on the same line, a Stan Lee, John Romita creation. But he does it for a couple months here with just Jack. Had you noticed this? Had either of you noticed this?
No, that's actually a great point.
I mean, I had seen that that's what it did here, but I did not put together that this was the first time we had seen it. But yeah, I think you're right.
And it's on all three books this month. It's on this Fantastic Four and Captain America, the three Kirby books, are all credited like this. And that is indeed how every Stan and Jack comic will be credited from now on.
Cool.
So what do you guys think of this issue? Rachel, what do you think of this issue?
This was one of the issues where one big story was wrapping up and another big one was kicking off. So it's a weird in-between interstitial issue, but there is a lot going on.
Yes.
You actually did not mention my favorite part, which was the cover copy with the guest starring credit. Guest starring Quicksilver and the Scarlet Witch in possibly the briefest, most unnecessary guest appearance you've ever seen. Boy, just wait till the 90s, y'all. That made me laugh so much. And actually, it turns out, I mean, first of all, Galactus probably is the unnecessary briefest cameo. And it's surprising that he doesn't get a cover copy mention.
Especially because it will turn out to be a huge part of Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch's background that they're connected to Wonder. So it actually makes a lot of sense to have them be in this issue. It makes no sense to have Galactus be in this issue, especially because it later turns out he did not eat Ego. So it's not like he's gobbling up that part of the storyline.
Yeah, no, exactly that. I had not realized how far back the implication of Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver being connected to Wundagore was. You know, the first time I really read it was that big Avengers story arc where they go to Wundagore, like 186, 187-ish. So I didn't realize how far back their connection went, and that I got really excited reading this part. But still, I mean, great cover copy. Chef's kiss.
Yep.
I admit though I disagree with you on how good Collada has gotten.
Matt is grading on a curve here.
We've been suffering through truly Collada inking for, several months at this point, for years at this point. And the fact that he's getting slightly better is just overwhelmingly wonderful for us. And you reading this issue without having recently reread all of these, you're like, oh dear God, this guy's awful. I assume that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Well,
also, Matt, I love the fact that you just said we've been suffering through some truly Collada inking for a while here, as though Collada is an adjective for something you suffer through.
Well, it's just in comparison to every other Kirby issue in this month. Oof. Like that panel on page 5 that you mentioned, Thor's arms are indeed very heavily shaded. Very, weirdly muscled, but then everybody's faces has such light line widths. It's weird. It's a very weird contrast. I know Collada has his defenders, and I don't ever want to hate on the guy because he'll have been killed or something. But this is not one of his better jobs. I'll just put it. Not one of the better jobs I've seen. I trust it's one of the better jobs you guys have seen so far.
Yeah, although I actually, and I've said this a number of times, I have to admit that in the 80s, when I was a kid reading comics, I liked the work that Collada was doing in the 80s. Now, granted, part of it may have been that he was inking Dazzler, and I was hitting puberty. So that may have had something to do with it.
I bet he had some good assistance by that time as well.
That might very well be part of it, too. That he was, yeah.
I've talked about in the past on this podcast how the Chicago Museum of Science and Industry had a wonderful exhibit on Marvel Comics, and it had all this fantastic memorabilia from Marvel Comics from the last 60 years, and the whole show was about how wonderful Marvel Comics was and how wonderful the history of Marvel Comics was, except for they had a little exhibit about how terrible Vince Colletta was. And it was like, and they were like, Marvel has had many wonderful inkers over the years. One of them was not Vince Colletta. Let's go ahead and look at a Vince Colletta inked page. And since we have photostats of the original Kirby pencils, let's have it re-inked by two of Kirby's preferred inkers, Mike Royer and Greg Theekson. And you can actually, it had this little interactive digital exhibit where you could erase the Colletta inks and then add the Royer and Theekson inks and see how much better they were. And I'm like going, damn, man, this is the whole point of this exhibit, is talk about how wonderful Marvel Comics is. And they devoted a whole wall of it to how terrible Vince Colletta is. It was harsh.
Wow, that is a roasting.
Yes. And I tend to not like to do that sort of stuff, since, it's like he has kids. You know what I mean? They're out there. And I've actually, there was one time, that's right. One time I think one of Coletta's kids commented on one of our social media posts.
My
and I was just like,
kids. I will say that this Man Beast panel where he's saying I feel and more I hate, that's a good panel.
Oh, yeah. No, that one's fantastic.
Beautifully inked, beautiful panel, and lots of crackle. Lots of good Kirby crackle there. Okay, so let's go and jump to the back of the book. We'll just quickly deal with Tales of Asgard. This is the first time in 2 years that we've had a new Tales of Asgard storyline begin. They actually wrapped up the old one this time. And we've got a new storyline beginning, sort of. I mean, Thor and the Warriors 3 are sort of returning home from Muspelheim, but they are riding through Nastrand, a land where nothing lives, because it turns out that Odin had decided to completely cleanse this land with fire once upon a time, and even turned the river into crystals with seemingly nuclear force. And then they are riding through it, and then they decide to camp for the night, and Volstagg is supposed to be watching, but he falls asleep, and then suddenly he wakes up, and there is an old man there who tells him, I can lead thee to the cave of the ancients, where no Asgardian hath ever trod. There thou wilt find knowledge fit only for the greatest warriors. I never think of Volstagg as being a big knowledge seeker, but this seems like a good deal to him. And he's like, yes, I'll go there. But it turns out the old man is actually the giant dragon Fafnir in disguise. This is the first we have met of Fafnir. I had to look up to make sure he had not been introduced before. He will become a character who will return in a fantastic Walt Simonson storyline with Fafnir. And that is the end of this fun little story. I love Volstagg. I always love any Volstagg story. Him sort of being involved in this sort of trickster storyline, I find delightful. What did you guys think of this story?
I mean, that last page is outstanding.
Yes.
With the big reveal of Fafnir. I also like that Kirby was sure to draw little modesty trunks into his character.
Yes, giant.
Indeed.
It's unclear if this is just a built-in codpiece that is part of his very body, or if he is wearing giant green diapers that match his skin tone. It's a little unclear.
Yes. The one thing I'll say about this story is, well, you were talking about Volstagg not being a knowledge seeker, but if he's being told it's knowledge that's only fit for the greatest warriors, that, he's like, oh, well, I'm one of the greatest warriors, so that's for me. But the only other thing I'll point out is that they make it clear here that Odin genocided this world.
Yeah.
I mean, they for rebelling against him, and then he killed everything in the entire world. So that's
pretty
interesting. Yeah, exactly. That's very yikes.
But also in the Thor Ragnarok movie, they do talk about Odin doing exactly that, and it's not something they just made up.
Nope.
Yeah, I guess so. All right.
Okay. Let's go ahead and move on to Tales to Astonish number 85 with Submariner and the Incredible Hulk.
Yes. Tales to Astonish number 85, The Missile and the Monster. So the cover is a Hulk cover, although we will be starting with the Submariner story. This looks like it probably is another Bill Everett cover here, it looks to me.
Yeah, that is bizarre Bill Everett abs.
All right, but first we're starting with, and once again, this isn't the greatest issue here. But so I'll try to dispense with it relatively quickly. So first we start with the Submariner story called "And One Shall Die." Imperious Rex, script written by Stan Lee, drawings penciled by Gene Colan, inking rendered by Bill Everett, panels lettered by Artie Simek, confusion compounded by Irving Forbush.
So it's interesting that one of the previous issues we had Bill Everett inking Gene Colan on Submariner, and it really looked like a Gene Colan issue. And Everett was inking very lightly, and it didn't look like an Everett issue at all. Well, this issue looks like a Gene Colan issue. Everett is inking with a much heavier hand here, and I'm not sure why. Obviously, Bill Everett created Submariner. He has reason to feel ownership over the character. He has reason to make it more of an Everett book. But it seems like the first time he was very faithful inking Colan, and this time, like this first page, like there's a real solidity to Namor that is much more a sort of Everett solidity than Colan has no solidity. Colan is the least solid penciler in Marvel history who draws very loose, sketchy, wispy characters. And this is not a loose, sketchy, wispy Namor here.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I have a theory on that.
What's that?
Just speaking editorially. Well, I noticed that Gene Colan had more than one art credit in these month's issues, and also he was not known for being really great at deadlines. I'm going to assume that this was more of a layouts and finishes situation, so Bill Everett got to put in a lot more of his own artwork into it.
Yeah, possibly, yeah. Okay, so we have been having this weird storyline where Submariner wants to be fighting Krang and also Dorma because he thinks Dorma has abandoned him of her own free will, but then he keeps on getting sidetracked by other things. Right now, he has some sort of mind control from number one of the Secret Empire. So at the end of the last story, Submariner had just been nuked in the face, but don't worry, he damaged the bomb, so the nuke wasn't full power. So he's fine. And so is number one, who was within sight of the thing. They're both fine. Everything's cool. So Dorma and Krang, who still have that thing where they look like folks of European descent and can breathe air, although they don't seem to have ever gotten out of their ship or, gone anywhere. So I don't know what's up with that. So they leave. Once again, kind of a confused story here. Number one then is trying to keep control of Submariner and keeps on almost losing control, and he's wanting to use Submariner to get the Hulk. We see a little bit of the Hulk here, but just a brief little cameo. So Submariner keeps on getting dizzy and trying to get his bearings back. There's a scene on a roller coaster where he almost gets hit by the roller coaster and gets out of the way. It's a fun little sequence, but really not much there going on. And at one point, as he's leaving the amusement park and going in towards New York City, somebody in the crowd says, "But if he lands in New York, that's where the Hulk is said to be." Right? And it's just sort of like, what, why? We don't need that exposition. We know that the Hulk is there. We know that's the point. We don't have to. Anyway. So the Submariner finally finds the little control thing in his ear that he pulls out. He's no longer being controlled, supposedly, but he says, but I still feel like I'm being beckoned into the city. So he's heading into the city, and meanwhile, number one of the Secret Empire is set a bomb to blow up right as the Hulk climbs in the window of his office. But anyway, then his robe gets caught in the door and he can't get it out, so he ends up getting blown up by his own bomb. He is hoisted by his own petard, as it were. And then we see we don't see the person, but we see someone scratching off Secret Empire from a chalkboard, and previously AIM has been scratched off. Then it says soon it will be time for Hydra to live again. So they've been setting this up in Strange Tales primarily for a couple, 1 month or 2 months now. Anyway, one way or the other, this is being set up, and it's now being carried over onto here. And then in the back, looks like they are now going to finally have the Krang stuff pay off, even though it's just sort of been stringing along for 8 months now? It's been a while. Anyway, yeah, not the best.
I gotta say, it's so bizarre that in this Namor book, why do we suddenly have this storyline where number one, who has been fighting Namor, suddenly is like, no, now I'm going to try to kill the Hulk, who will suddenly show up in this Namor book when this all could have easily happened in the back half of the book, which is actually a Hulk book. And then the Hulk ends up accidentally, sort of just by being there, tricking the Secret Empire number one into killing himself accidentally. And why is this even in Namor's book? Why are we even hearing about this? Or even better yet, why not write this story in a way where Namor, who has just been controlled by Secret Empire number one and now might want revenge, or at least want him to, I'm going to go destroy your machinery so you can stop doing this to me. Why not have Namor coming after him when he gets caught in the door and blows himself up? Why the Hulk? This makes no sense. I do kind of like the way Cohen draws the sequence on pages 10 and 11 of the bumbling number one getting himself caught in the door and then desperately trying to yank himself loose. I kind of like that sequence.
And they have to have some clumsy exposition there about why he doesn't just duck out of his robe. I mean, it's a robe. You can supposedly just slip out of it, but they have some dialogue there that supposedly explains that.
He's got really nice wingtips on too.
He does. You're right.
Yeah, I don't know why he didn't just take off his robe and call it a day. But I guess he won't yield. That's what he said. As far as the art goes, I think it was generally pretty solid. But I am very biased in favor of both artists. So Gene Colan and Bill Everett, I'll take that all day long. But yeah, I don't understand quite how the Hulk got into number one's plans. I don't get a lot of things. These are the people who, the Secret Empire, I mean, these are the people who eventually will take over the White House, right?
Yes, I believe so.
They got a long ways to go then, because a guy, their leader just killed himself by getting his robe caught in the door.
Well, and all the rest of them were killed a month ago by Gabe Jones.
See, this is...
blowing them all up with a potato masher grenade.
What I do like is that where you see the blackboard with AIM crossed out and the Secret Empire getting crossed out, the I in AIM has, the dot. And I just love that little attention to detail. I think that's hilarious. My main question, is this leading up to the issue where Namor and Hulk actually do fight each other?
Well, we just had a bizarre issue where they set up the whole issue to have them fight each other, and then they ended up in the same movie theater the same time, and they just missed each other and they each went their separate ways. It was utterly bizarre. I think there is an issue coming up where they're going to do like a full issue story of Namor and Hulk fighting each other. I don't remember precisely.
Okay, because one of my formative Marvel educational reads was Origins of Marvel Comics, of course. And you had the Hulk origin story, and then the follow-up story is an issue where he and Namor fight each other, and Namor wins, but, he salutes his fallen enemy because, that's Namor. And so I was really interested to see if this is leading up to that actual story, because that's a great issue.
Okay.
But this is an okay one for comedic value anyway.
Yes.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the Submariner book has never really found its purpose for being. It's a shame because Submariner's a great character, but I usually find he's a great character when he's a foil, when he's an antagonist for other characters, and when he's the protagonist, it just has never seemed to really come together for me.
Yeah.
So, shall we talk about the Missile and the Monster?
Let's do it.
So, we have a big, huge addition to the Marvel Universe this month in both this and Strange Tales, which will be in the next episode. We have the introduction of John Buscema, and he doesn't really seem to have found his superhero style yet at this point, but he very soon will. So Script Stan Lee pencils John Buscema, inks John Tartaglione, Lettering, Ray Holloway. Hulk's pants pressing, Irving Forbush. So John Tartaglione has actually been doing the inking in Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos for the last few months. That we are not reading those issues in this podcast, but he's been doing a really good job in that. Dick Ayers is penciling and John Tartaglione is inking, and they really, really work together well. Here, I don't like his inks on John Buscema nearly as much.
No.
Yeah, it doesn't work very well here.
Buscema's two-part debut this month in The Hulk and Strange Tales, I feel like it's a real question of what a difference an inker makes. And I read this one first, and I'm like, this is not good. Like, can Buscema not troll yet? Is he not a great artist yet? Why is this issue so weak? And then I read the Strange Tales book, which I loved. And I'm like, no, Buscema is a great artist. He is just somehow he and Tartaglione are rubbing each other the wrong way. This is not working. I should say the Hulk's abs, we've been complaining about Everett's work on the Hulk's abs. The Hulk's abs on this first page are worse than anything Everett ever did. These are terrible abs on the first page of this issue. And just generally, I'm not a fan of the art in this issue, but I was very worried. And then all of my worries were alleviated by the Strange Tales issue.
We'd seen that the Hulk is currently in New York City, and we'd also seen that Rick Jones, in a really super bizarre story, was for some reason in Florida. I do not remember him getting to Florida, but he was. And then he needs to get to New York because he hears that's where the Hulk is. So he ends up taking a job driving a car for a super sketchy dude up to New York who basically tells him, and whatever you do, don't look in the trunk. So and Rick's like, sure. Yeah, that sounds not sketchy at all. I'm going to go ahead and do that. It turns out in this that he is a foreign agent, and he has not a bomb in the trunk, but something to control a test missile that is being tested, the Orion missile, which apparently is completely impervious to being shot down to anti-missile technology. So this guy runs this thing that controls it and is going to have it drop on New York City rather than in whatever test area it's supposed to be. So the Hulk, meanwhile, was, he's usually got that thing where he just wants to be left alone, but people are scared of him, so they're shooting him, and so he's in a big fight with, looks like, both the military and the police. It's kind of difficult to say. Eventually, Rick Jones is like, hey, the Hulk, you remember me? Here, get in the car, and is able to find a deserted section of New York. Okay, cool. Deserted sections in New York, very easy to find, and calms the Hulk down for a little bit. But then that's the moment when the trunk opens up of this car. Well, it's funny, the military finally reaches this guy who had hired Rick. Apparently his last name is Gorky, so clearly he is a Russian spy. So they're just like, all right, put your hands up, mister. And he says, oh, and take your hand away from that control panel. And the guy says, certainly. But not until I press this one fateful button. Even a gunshot would be too late to stop me now. And then the military person says, I can't shoot you in cold blood. And I'm like, really? I would think you probably would, honestly. But, that seems implausible.
You don't even have to kill him.
Right.
No.
You wing him. Wing him, or shoot the piece of machinery he's about to manipulate. You can do something, man. So anyway, Hulk gets into a fight with this big robot that comes out of the trunk, which I believe is simultaneously being a destructive robot and starting to control that missile, or they're both related in some way. I'm not entirely sure how, but then the Hulk sees the missile coming. There's some part of his mind that is still Bruce Banner that remembers that he designed the thing and that it's not good for it to hit New York. So he jumps up and catches onto the missile, and then, of course, he happens to change back into Bruce Banner at that moment. So presumably he is going to be able to somehow defuse the missile at this point, which it looks like is maybe about 3 seconds away from hitting New York, but that's fine.
You would think that Bruce Banner would be strong enough to hang on to the missile, but he is. Let's just talk about how atrociously plotted this book has been recently. Really, this book and Namor, two of the most atrociously plotted books in all of Marvel history, I'm going to say. Really poorly plotting recently. Keep in mind that the main storyline that was going on in the Hulk is that the Secret Empire had sent Boomerang to steal this missile. And that was a major storyline that is still, we are very much in the middle of. It never wrapped up. Well, now in two other books, in the S.H.I.E.L.D. book and the Namor book, the Secret Empire has been completely eliminated. And now when are we going to come back to Boomerang, who's like, hey, everybody, I stole this missile. I'm brought it back to Secret Empire headquarters. Hey, guys, here I am. Guys, who's, hello? Is anybody here?
Matt, do you really want Boomerang back?
No, I don't. But if we were in the middle of that storyline and it's so poorly plotted, it's such an atrociously poorly plotted storyline. It's just, I like the idea of the books overlapping with each other more and having Secret Empire be a villain in more than one book, but you can't have them get completely eliminated in these other books before you wrap up the storyline of the Hulk. It's just a mess. Rachel, what did you think of this issue of Incredible Hulk?
I actually thought, because I did not realize how long the storyline had been going on, I thought the cliffhanger is fantastic.
Yes.
You have Bruce Banner on top of a missile that he designed, but it can't be shot down, and it's about to explode. Bruce, what the heck can Bruce Banner do about the missile? Hulk can fight it. It's going to be a lot harder for Bruce to do it. And then I'm going to assume that in the next issue, when he's trying to do something really delicate, he's going to get stressed out and Hulk out. But I have not read it, so can't say for sure.
I don't understand. If you haven't read the issue, Rachel, how could you know that would happen?
It's my super editor powers. What I do want to point out about the sketchy guy who gave Rick Jones the car to drive, which I do find hilarious. Rick Jones is just like, yeah, sure, whatever. It's amazing he has survived this long.
Rick Jones. Yeah.
The guy who gave it to him had an incredibly tacky Hawaiian shirt. The bald head with a ring of hair and a big cigar. That just screams supervillain.
Yes.
I don't know. It sort of screams middle-aged, middle-class dude on vacation in Florida to me.
Right. It's like a sleazy landlord has decided to become a supervillain. It's a choice, and it's hilarious. But it's a choice.
Indeed.
Okay. So let's go ahead and wrap up this episode with Uncanny X-Men number 26. It has the word Holocaust on the cover, which, as we talked about, used to be a more generic term, is now used specifically to apply to one Holocaust. And it was almost sort of obscene to talk about other Holocausts with the word Holocaust, but that's the way it was at the time. We jump inside the issue. Editing Stanley, again, giving himself first credit, even though he's only editor, doesn't really, not really good. Editing Stanley, script Roy Thomas, art Werner Roth, inks Dick Ayers, lettering Sam Rosen, Mayan headdresses Irving Forbush. I'm going to deal with this issue very quickly. It's a terrible issue. In the last issue, El Tigre, a Central American adventurer, found an amulet. It turned him into the Mayan god Kukulkan. While he was in a natural history museum, the male X-Men are still in the natural history museum trying to confront him. Then Kukulkan has to deal with his own assistants, who he also takes care of rather quickly. And then he goes out into the world, and he is going to head back to the Mayan pyramids. Why? I forget. He is going there to increase his powers in some way or something. The hour has come to return to San Rico, there to restore the kingdom of the Mayas to its ancestral glory. So I guess that's why he's going. So then Professor X is able to use his mind to wake up the male X-Men. We then cut briefly to Jean, who is sort of still semi-retired from the X-Men and is hanging out at college. 2 issues ago, she just happened to run into an X-Men villain at her college. And this issue, it happens again. She just happens to run into the Mimic, Calvin Rankin, who got mind wiped by Xavier and runs into Jean. It's like, do I know you? And she's like, nope, you do not, because your mind was wiped. And he's like, I think I know you, and I think I'm going to figure this out. She then goes and visits the X-Men. They all decide to go down to the Mexican pyramids. Now, I would love to one day visit the Egyptian pyramids, but they're far away. I've always thought I really should visit the Mexican pyramids one of these days. Have either of you ever been to the Mexican pyramids?
Yes.
No.
I've been to the Aztec ones. I've been to the big one. And then I believe I've been to a small one in the Mayan area.
Yeah, this issue had me wishing I could go visit them. It's funny. So Jean was just reunited with the X-Men, and she seemingly doesn't go on this trip with them. They all leave and go off without her. And so just the male X-Men go on this trip. They fight some jungle animals in some fun pages. Steve, I said you put it on the line that one of these seems to have inspired the game Frogger, where Beast is leaping from rock to rock in a river and then leaps on one that he thinks is rock, but it's actually alligator's mouth, which is something you see a lot in the game Frogger.
It also predates the James Bond movie where he runs over the alligators.
Yes.
I forgot.
Live and Let Die, I think that was.
Yep.
So then they go ahead and they end up, I guess Kukulkan seemingly now has modern day Mayan assistants who trap the X-Men in a pit. I kind of like the panel on page 14 where the X-Men are buried in the pit. They cover themselves with ice, and then the people are like, well, you're still buried in the pit. Doesn't matter if you're covered in ice. But then while the guys carrying the spears are looking down at the ice, they are using Cyclops to tunnel out the other direction. I think it's kind of a neat panel where they do that. Anyway, they end up fighting Kukulkan, and at one point, as they're fighting each other, Cyclops accidentally hits Angel with his force beams. But then they finally defeat Kukulkan, sort of a clever way, where Iceman realizes if he covers the top of the pyramid in ice, that will take away his powers. And then Kukulkan's defeated. But then the rest of them are like, oh no, but Angel is still knocked out. And then Angel wakes up just long enough to say, it was Cyclops. He struck at me on purpose. But I didn't. You know I didn't. Why would I have blasted you deliberately? Because of Marvel Girl. You will ever too. And then he passes out again. So this puts Psych in a difficult spot. This is like what he just woke up briefly and said was not true. I did not attack him because of Marvel Girl. And then he has to carry Angel away. And that is the end of the issue. Next issue, the mind-staggering mimic returns. So seemingly his brainwashing will wear off. I don't know why Jean had been reunited with the boys. I don't know why she didn't come along on this. They really seem to be dedicated to her being retired from the group at this point. I know that doesn't last forever, but I don't understand why they didn't bring her along on the mission. Anyway, this issue, I'm not loving Thomas's writing on this book. I'm definitely not loving Werner Roth's penciling on this book. And, Dick Ayers isn't saving him in any way. But this was an okay issue. It had a great setting. I am fascinated by the Mayan pyramids. And I kind of enjoyed the whole jungle dangers section, but I wish Sheen was here, and that's all I have to say about this issue. Rachel, what did you think about this issue?
It's always humbling to look back at the X-Men's early years and think, wow, you guys are going to become the giant dominant powerhouse of the Marvel Universe, huh? This was probably my least favorite issue that I read out of everything that we've discussed. Roy Thomas really is Roy Thomas to his fullest effect in scripting. There's a lot of very problematic Mexican people running around.
Yes.
They've got sombreros, ponchos, somebody says caramba, like the whole enchilada, as it were. So yeah, it's kind of a bummer to have Jean just be in her support role. She has a chance to have more action next issue. The Mimic is coming back because she'll be front and center, but who knows? Professor X looks like he's having a migraine on the cover. And I did enjoy Beast and Iceman just trying to stay out of the personal drama between Angel and Cyclops. They're just there to do their job. They don't really need to get involved. I did like that same panel that you pointed out where, you see the cross section like below the ground and Angel makes a self burn on himself by saying, why do I sound so much like Hawkeye? I was like, dang, So
I had that noted too, and I'm like, how do you know what Hawkeye sounds like?
But good comparison, my man, because
he reads Marvel comics.
Yeah, I guess he reads the Marvel comics, exactly.
And then the worst part for me was on page 18, the really big panel with the snake tower starting to crumble. That is a very phallic looking tower.
Yes.
It's really unfortunate looking.
Oh.
Not one of the best X-Men issues I've ever read. Even the cover looks like this weird 80s underground art. It's so strange.
Did you say that you were not familiar with Werner Roth before?
I am not familiar with Werner Roth, and I can kind of see why.
Well, I think yes. So in some communication we had before this, you had said, I'm looking to get to the bottom of the mystery of who this Werner Roth guy is. And I was like, oh, well, he also sometimes goes by the name Jay Gavin, and he is aggressively adequate.
No lies detected.
Yes, indeed.
There was an issue of X-Men a couple months ago that was had these self-deprecating credits where it said like, really adequate story by Roy Thomas, barely passable art by Werner Roth. And it was like, I'm like, you are telling no lies here. This is all true. You are being shockingly honest here.
I will say, fantastic costume design.
Oh, for Kukulkan?
Yep, he looks
Yeah,
great.
sure. Yeah. So the one other thing that I saw is, again, another example of Werner Roth's poor storytelling, which I've pointed out a few times before. On the bottom of page 19, we have to have in dialogue saying that Kukulkan had run up to the top of the pyramid and was in the temple at the top of the pyramid, and Beast and Iceman see him do that off panel, and then Beast is running towards it. It's like, that's the whole point of comic books. You see it. You do not just be like, hey, he ran over there. Can you see him doing that thing? Oh yeah, I see him. Too bad the camera isn't pointed that way so that the audience could see it too.
Yeah.
So
maybe I gave him a little too much credit by calling him aggressively adequate.
Yeah, aggressively inadequate. I think the one thing I like about this issue is just I do like love triangles, and they're sort of bringing the love triangle to a head. Again, it would be better if Jean was there, but I feel like I do like how Roy is bringing the love triangle to a head, and again, sort of paying off story potential that Stan had built up, and now that Roy's on the book, he can pay off. So that's the one thing I like about this issue.
So I think we need to wrap the first half of this up here. So Rachel, where can people find you on the internet or elsewhere?
I am on social media, rgluckst on Instagram, Blue Sky, and still formerly known as Twitter. And also my own website, superstareditor.com.
Fantastic. Okay, so thank you everybody for coming and listening to us yammer on about Marvel Comics here. Yeah, so we are going to sign off for this, and then a week from now, you will be able to hear us talk about the rest of the comics from this month. So thank you very much to our guests. Rachel, thank you very much to our listeners for listening, and take care and stay safe out there.
Okay, thanks everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Marvel Reread Club. Please subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Your reviews and ratings are a great help and always appreciated. We love hearing from you. Go to marvelrereadclub.com to find notes and join the discussion about this episode. We're also on Facebook and Instagram. See you next time.